Stan Van Hoos and Malloy, who was on the Maryland, and possibly Van Hoos. And his buddy George Olson is in Pearl Harbor today. And just probably 6 years ago, we still had 6 Pearl Harbor vets in our database.
Before.
It's Lou there.
Slideshow full screen, huh?
Everybody from Fort?
Wait, what?
There we are.
Yeah.
It's a long distance award. What grade are you? Homeschool?
Second, yeah.
Oh, okay.
You knew the answer to that.
Equivalent.
Second. All right. Kim.
Any word from Dan? Dan? Any word from Dan at all?
I talked to him about 4 weeks ago. He said I'm still locked down in Los Angeles.
Oh.
So we won't have an appearance from him this year.
Okay.
Uh,
How about the other, the Vietnam that, his name was either George or was Olson, one of the other, I think it was Olson.
You talking about the little guy?
No, a pretty good sized guy.
Olson.
We went to dinner with him downtown here, and then we came.
You're talking about George Olson?
Well, was that his name also, George Olson? Because George Olson,
Oh, no, Bill Olson.
Bill,
Bill
there you
Olson,
go.
that's good, yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was Olson.
Okay, yeah, Bill. I think he's gonna be sitting home tonight watching us. I asked him the other day if he's planning on coming in tonight, and he wasn't too sure about it.
Okay.
He's getting a little bit weaker right now, so he sticks close to home.
Well, it's 6 o'clock. You wanna do your intro?
Well, I think we can, oh.
Right.
I do want to apologize for one thing, though, folks.
Do you want the
That,
microphone on?
At the very last minute, I called Bill Ensign today at the VFW, he's commander there. And I reminded him that 3 years ago, 2018, on this same occasion, he provided a color guide for us. And has been standard, it's been SOP every year, except I grouped. I called him too late, so he could not provide a color guide for us this evening. My apologies. I'm at fault for that one.
Do you want the microphone down, or are you just gonna do your intro without it?
Right by your hand there.
Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Okay.
Go for it.
All right. Are we on the air?
Mhm.
Oh, we are.
Yes, we
All
are.
right. Good evening and welcome to US Veterans Project Library.us to our program this evening. And our mission, of course, is very short and simple: to educate the American people in military affairs through our public library systems. A very short example: if you were seeking information on a loved one or a friend or a neighbor as to his or her position in the military, you could go to your public library, get the book off the shelf and say, oh, well, so-and-so is a radioman on a V-17 or whatever. Or you can look up in the book what a V-17 radioman does. And also, we are going to provide history of all of our branches of service, as well as knowledge of the different positions that are available in the various branches of service. And that way, for those who don't have a computer, they can use the library computer system. They can look up their friends or their loved ones' job description, if you will, then go into the computer room, send them an email, let them know that you'll be communicating with them henceforth. So this is our mission, people. And we are gradually building. It's going to take a while, but we're getting the job done. And we're very proud to be able to communicate with the world now via the web. So we want to welcome and say good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you tuned in to us here in Wisconsin tonight for this program. In 2018, we started the Pearl Harbor Day program, and we had with us on that date in 2018 Stan Van Heusen, quartermaster on the USS Maryland. He was aboard the morning the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. And then in 2019, we were unable to get anybody that was on Battleship Row, but we did have we had 2 Navy vets and 1 Army vet. I believe the Army vet was from New Zealand. And they were our visitors here on December 7th of 2019. And of course, 220 were all shut down like most places were. And now we're back in action. And tonight, well, I'm not going to tell you about it. I'm going to have Mark update you on our guest for this evening. And I do want to say that in all of my years as a tour guide on the USS Cobia, a World War II submarine docked at the Wisconsin Maritime Museum in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, that is the closest I came to Navy operations. I was very fortunate to be on board in 1997 when the World War II submarine vets had their, national convention in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And they visited the museum in Manitowoc for 10 days. And of course, it was a great educational learning period for us on the tour guide staff. They did all the work, we did all the listening, we took it all in, and we certainly improved our program there on the U.S. World War II submarines. And the first tour that I conducted when the veterans were there, I had Admiral Eugene Flocke on board. He and his wonderful wife were on my tour, the first one. And after the tour, Admiral Flocke stayed with us for 3 days and autographed his book, Thunder Below. And I might mention this is excellent reading if you want to know something about Pearl Harbor, because during in the beginning of the war, I might add, Admiral Chester Nimitz appointed Admiral Eugene Flocke as the sub-pack commander for the Pacific Theater during World War II. And the Admiral, he himself commanded the USS Barb, which was the #1 submarine for sinking the most Japanese tonnage in the Pacific in World War II. But now I'm going to brag a little bit too. In Manitowoc during the war, we built 28 submarines at the Manitowoc Shipbuilding Company, just about 4 blocks up the river from where we are located in Manitowoc now. And 18 of those submarines were Arcado class submarines, which the Cobia is, and 10 on the Vallejo class type submarines. That is a, shall we say, a larger boat, has a crew of 85, whereas the Cato class has a crew of 82. But anyway, getting into the submarine end of it, that is really the closest I ever got to Navy operations, get involved in such things. It got close to Pearl Harbor. I was very fortunate too, in the 17 years I spent in Manitowoc on the Columbia. It seems like every summer, there was always somebody on one of my tours that would take out their smartphone and say, here's some picture. We just got back from Pearl Harbor. And to me, that was really, that made me happy because I never have been at Pearl Harbor. And all these people just showing me what's going on over there. Some are over there for Memorial, some are just visiting there during the summer. And one summer that caught my attention was a couple that showed me the pictures of the Environmental Agency wanted to stop the leak on the Arizona, that little oil leak. There's only what, one little drop, if that much, every minute or 5 minutes. Don't quote me. But anyway, you can see it. You'll see it on films where the oil is still leaking on the Arizona. You can see it from the top of the memorial from what I gathered. But that's the closest I ever got to Pearl Harbor and naval operations. I do mention to you that I mentioned this book to you. It's under below because Admiral Flockey, as I say, he commanded the #1 submarine, the USS Barb. I didn't finish my story. I'll make it real quick, but the 28 submarines that we built in Manitowoc, of the 18 Cato class type, which the Columbia is, we built the submarine called the USS Rasher. The Rasher came in #2 in a fleet of 287 submarines that were assigned to the Pacific Fleet during World War II. So we're very proud of the fact that we came in with #2. The Admiral had #1. We'll let him have it. Okay. However, it's what, in let's go back 5 years possibly. We learned that Admiral Flockey had passed away. His wife was given a destroyer escort someplace out in the Pacific and spread his ashes there according to his will, rather than being entombed at the Naval Academy, of which he was a graduate at Annapolis, Maryland. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let us continue here, get down to the nitty-gritty here, to the important part. And to carry on with the program this evening, I want to introduce you to Mark Finnegan. Mark is the CEO and founder of Vetsroll.org. I might say that's kind of like the ground version of the honor flight. Mark will inform you and bring you up to date on the program, as well as other important matters here this evening concerning our bits with the Pearl Harbor December 7th program. Okay, Mark.
Thanks, Ben.
You're welcome. Thank you.
How's everyone doing tonight? Thanks for coming out. Yeah, as Don said, my name is Mark Finnegan. I'm the I guess president and co-founder of Vetsroll.org or Vetsroll Inc. And in the back is Holly Jensen. She's our VP with Vetsroll. I think if you've been here previously, you're familiar with our program now, but what we had done for 10 years in a row, and now with COVID, it's been on the sideline, is we take a caravan once a year for 4 days. We take a caravan of 220 veterans and Rosita Riveters from all across the US. We've had them from 37 states to come here to go on the trip. And we take them on an all expenses paid trip to Washington, DC. The first day going from Beloit down to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base down in Dayton, Ohio. We tour the Air Museum down there, and then we stay overnight in Dayton. The second day, then we go cross country out to Alexandria, Virginia, which is a suburb of Washington, DC. And we stay overnight there on Monday night and Tuesday night. Tuesday, we get a National Park Service police escort into Washington, DC, and we tour the war memorials and Arlington National Cemetery, very similar to what the honor flights do. And then on Wednesday, we come all the way from DC back to Beloit in the one day, but we have a motorcycle and really a police escort for the vast majority of the trip back. There's even one short section where we have a helicopter escort above us on the interstate. We are really, really hoping to get back on the road. I've got brochures and posters on the table in the back. Right now, our trip is planned for May 22nd to the 25th, 2022. Provided we can get this COVID in check, and it's just rearing its ugly head again, and it's not an encouraging thing, but we're sure hoping. And you know, one of the sad truths is Holly, she's an attorney in Janesville, and she has a database of death notices, obituaries she can tap into. And of the 2,000 veterans, just about 2,000 veterans we've taken to Washington DC in 10 years, it's closing in on 700 of them have been called home already. It's just amazing, over a third of them. And of the ones on the wait list that would have gone last year or this year, or hopefully next year, it's around 30 now, I think, is what, 25, somewhere in there. About 25 of them have passed on, you know, they didn't get to go on their trip. And, you know, to go on that trip and experience the closure that comes out when you're rolling down the road, and it's like a bus full of strangers on Sunday morning, because they're coming from all over the US. It's like the first day of school. When you go there, you don't know who these other kids are and stuff like that. Well, the vets are really no different. Sometimes they gotta be kind of pushed onto the buses, you know, because they don't know what they're getting into. Once they get rolling down the road, the closure starts, stories start to get shared. And like I tell people all the time, the vet from Fort Atkinson could be listening to a veteran from California, and a vet from Florida, and a vet from Montana. And all of a sudden they hear, in this brotherhood of veterans, they hear the stories that they thought maybe they just had within themselves. Maybe it was a happy memory, maybe it was a fear that they had, they never shared with their wife or whatever. And once those stories start, and Holly's one of our bus leaders, she could tell you this better than I could, but once those stories start to flow, they go. We kind of instruct our assistants to sit back and let that closure begin, and that's what it is. They strike up conversations, I'm sure you're familiar with it. They strike up conversations, and it's just magic the way it happens. And they start the bonding process. And that first night or the first afternoon, we toured the Air Museum there at Wright-Patterson. And, you know, we've even had veterans that have been on our trip that were on some of the planes that are in the museum even, and that's really special. So then they share that camaraderie. We do a mail call, which is letters that come from school kids and FFAs and church groups and senior centers and from all over. I know at one point we had almost 10,000 cards and letters for 220 vets. It's just amazing. And some of the cards and the letters that the young ones write are just priceless. I never forget one that said, "Dear veteran, thank you for severing our country." They spelled serving wrong. It said, "Thank you for severing our country." Another one said, "Dear veteran, my grandpa was in World War II. Did you know him?" You know, just these innocent letters are so much fun. So, and then on the second day, then we're in DC. We tour the war memorials. In most years, we'll have the Marine Corps Silent Drill Platoon will come out and do a presentation for us, which is a really special thing if you've ever seen it. We go to Arlington National Cemetery, and the National Park Service actually escorts all 10 of our buses inside the cemetery up to the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. And if you ever get a chance to go, has everyone here been to DC? Or I should say, anyone that has not been to DC here? Have you? No? Oh, bucket list for both families right here. It is just so special. I have a sister-in-law, and one of the reasons we started Vetrol, I have a sister-in-law, Cindy, that was a combat nurse in Vietnam. She was an officer, and she contracted MS, and she had to take a forced retirement out of the Army in 1982. And so then she got real involved with disabled and paralyzed veterans and whatnot for about 20 years. And then on Christmas Eve of 2003, she choked to death on some pizza and passed away. Well, they buried her the following spring at Arlington National Cemetery. And the reason I bring that up is because if you go to Arlington and you see the pageantry of an officer's burial, it's something that'll change your life forever. It changed my life. My son and I went out there for that. The horse-drawn caisson, the missing man on the horse and whatnot. It's just an incredible honor. And between that and the timing of it happened to be at the same time they were dedicating the World War II memorial. Well, my father was a World War II Navy veteran, And by that time, he had been gone for, 3 years or so. And so we had been thinking about what we could do, to honor our father's service and whatnot. Well, fast forward a little bit to late 2009, we're in the RV dealership. We have an RV dealership down in Beloit. And we were contacted by ABC TV's Extreme Home Makeover. Does anybody remember that show? Where they would take a family that was in dire financial or medical, straits, and they would surprise them, literally move them out of their house for a week, and a team of volunteers would go in and just completely rebuild it. Well, they contacted us because they were doing a build in Northwest Illinois, out in the cornfield, basically, and they wanted to know if we would provide RVs so they could plug into their generators and keep them cool and keep their celebrities comfortable, and they can do their hair in the morning and everything like that. And so we said, sure. And now this will all come back around to Guttural, but I said, sure. But it was a sign that I worked too much, because I had never heard of the show. And I think everybody in America at the time had heard of Extreme Home Makeover. And it's kind of funny now looking back at it, but what caught me is my father's name was Cy, C-Y. And being a guy, I was barely listening to the lady on the phone talking to me, and she said, well, come out here to Freeport and meet the star of the show. His name, I thought they said Cy, it's Ty Pennington was his name. And so we said, oh, that'd be cool. Yeah, we'll go out. So we went out, we met the cast and crew there at the hotel. Well, then what we found out once they started to build on this house that they were doing, we found out that we weren't doing anything directly to help this family. And this is at the beginning of the Great Recession. And so we asked the producers, we said, can we do a fundraiser to help the family? Because all we're doing is providing comfort for a bunch of people from Hollywood. Can we do a fundraiser? And I'll never forget, they said, well, you can, but this is Friday afternoon. We wrap up on Wednesday. You don't have a lot of time. And we went back to work. We sat down, we got on emails and our cell phones, called a whole bunch of people that we had in our contacts. And by Wednesday, we had raised almost $12,000 for that family. And it was proof that if the cause was right, people would still give, even though the economy was tough. Well, a couple months further down the road, we heard about the wonderful Honor Flight program, where they fly the veterans to Washington, D.C. from around the United States. And we got thinking, man, that's an awesome program. They're honoring, at that time, it was all World War II vets. We thought, how about if we do it something similar, but we do it with RVs and we slow it down. Give these vets 4 days on the road together, let them build those relationships and share those stories and whatnot. And so that's what we did. And on March 17th, 2010, St. Patrick's Day, we went on the radio in Janesville and we announced that in 60 days, we were leaving for Washington, D.C. And we hadn't raised our first dollar. We didn't have a nurse or anybody lined up yet. And this is a testament to how fast the greatest generation is being called home. This is really just less than 12 years ago. And in 60 days, we had 117 World War II vets and 8 Rosita Riveters that signed up for that trip. And we raised almost $90,000 in that 60 days. We took the trip, 9 RVs and 3 coach buses, and got back to Beloit, and I thought, man, we did a pretty good job here. We were going to go back to selling RVs, and my phone started ringing then, and it really never stopped. And so we formed a board of directors, became a 501c3, which is an IRS rating. If you're going to be a charity, you need to be a 501c3. So we said, okay, we'll do it one more time in 2011. Well, 2011 led to 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19. And by the time COVID hit, we had taken almost 2,000 vets out there free of charge. So now that we've been sidelined with COVID, we've kind of redirected some of the things that we're doing, and we're staying involved in the veterans' lives. These slides that you've been seeing up here, that was an event we did back in August. We called it a Millennium of American History. And the idea behind it was, we found in our database, we had, I believe it was 23 veterans that were 99 to 106 years old. And so I got thinking that August 15th was the 76th anniversary of the end of World War II, the Japanese surrender. So we thought, how about if we contacted these guys, and if we got 10 of them together, 10 of them times 100 years, that's a millennium, maybe they would come and share their stories. And little did I realize that every single one of them wanted to come and share their stories. And so there was one gentleman who wasn't there in person, but he logged in from Stockton, California, and Major William White, and he is the third oldest veteran in the United States now. He's a Marine, like that man over there in the corner there, and Major White is logged in via Zoom at 106 years of age, and we had approximately 500 people in attendance, and Major White led the entire room in the Marine Corps hymn, and that was just so cool. And we had 3 generals that came to tribute the veterans. Diane Hendricks, I don't know if you're familiar with Diane Hendricks here in Fort Atkinson, but she's a mega star in the Beloit area, and she was there. She provided the facility for us to use. And we had in all, I think we had 15 veterans in person, and then we had other ones that we did remotely and whatnot. And just this last weekend, a photographer and I, we finished driving around northern Illinois and southern Wisconsin here. And we finished taking professional portraits in the houses or in the assisted living facilities of these veterans that are 100, he's one of our 101-year-olds, of these veterans who are now averaging 100 to 101 years old, had them sit for a professional portrait and got them developed, it's electronic nowadays, but anyway, got them printed yesterday. And they're going out in a nice setting, and they're going out to all their families for Christmas, so I'll have that as a keepsake. Next week, this gentleman right here is Bill Dees. He was a paratrooper at Okinawa, and he came up from St. Louis. And next weekend, we're driving down to St. Louis because he's celebrating his 100th birthday. And it's just the stories, that gentleman right there, Bob Babcock from Rockford, he's 100 right now. He was a tank commander that liberated a Jewish concentration camp at the end of the war. That guy's nothing. So, and the stories just continue on. I'll just refer back to a couple of the ladies that come up there were our Rosie the Riveters from World War II. My mom is still living. I was with her today. She'll be 96 in a few weeks. And if you study World War II and you study the history, we would not have been victorious in World War II had it not been for the women moving into the workforce and taking over those male jobs and allowing us to deploy troops around the world. And it just, the whole story of World War II is such an amazing thing. And then this morning we were in Beloit with Beloit's own Pearl Harbor veteran, Stan Van Hoos, who has been here with us previous years. Stan is now 101 himself. He was on the USS Maryland. So if you ever see pictures of Pearl Harbor, you'll see the infamous one with the ship rolled over, sitting next to the Maryland. The ship rolled over was the Okinawa or the Oklahoma, and the Maryland was right next to it. Stan's ship was protected by the Oklahoma getting torpedoed, and Stan was a quartermaster on the Maryland. Well, the gentleman we're going to try, I guess, in a few minutes here, out in California, is Lou Conter, who Don spoke with yesterday. And Lou Conter is one of the final 2 survivors of the Arizona, and he was also a quartermaster on the Arizona. So I don't know, is it time to try and reach Mr. Conter, or do we wait?
Did
or-
you want to do the video before we call him so that folks are familiar with his story?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, sure didn't come to listen to me. I'm gonna turn off the overhead light there.
All right, sounds good.
And they knew immediately what it was. And their guns were firing within 30 seconds on the ship and on the beach. I joined the Navy after high school. Graduated from high school, Weaver's High School, outside of Denver, Colorado. We're in the Navy there. No, my uncle was in World War I, but that was all I had. It was exempt from World War I subway. Just one of those things that I'm saying. Well, there was a neighbor of ours, Wicks, joined the Navy in 1935. He was a signalman, third-class signalman on the Nevada, USS Nevada. And he came home, in those days, you come home for 90 days before you had to sign up again for another 4 years to ship over. And he signed up. And he came home, and so we were all sitting around there, and he says, come on, you guys walk, go down with me. I was working at Swiftly Company from 3:30 to 11. And I got signed up, so we went down, and of course the Navy recruiter grabbed us and said, there's a 9-month waiting list. So why don't you take the exam? So we all took the exam and passed it, forgot about it. I went home, went back to Swift Government at 3:30, and I was in bed one morning at 8 o'clock, but I didn't get home till 12:30. My mother came up and said, are you in trouble, Louis? And I said, no, why? She said, well, somebody's asking for you on the phone, Louis Anthony Contra. So I went down, we only had one phone down in the dining room, so I went down and asked the Navy Department. They said, we're 6 members short for our draft tonight, 5:45, we gotta fill it up, would you like to come out and talk to us? I thought, okay, I don't have to work till 3:30. So I went down and talked to them, and they talked to them and signing up for 4 years. Leaving that night at 5:45, so I called my mother, I called my girlfriend, and I called my dad at work, he was working something. And I went down, picked up my check, because we got paid every week in a check. We're getting 30 cents an hour. So 40 hours a week, about $12 a week, so we got a $10 bill, two $1 bills in an envelope every week. And I got my $12 and 5:45 that night, I was in train for San Diego, and that's how I started. So, 18. We could sign up for 4 years without any parent signature, and 18. 17, you had to get your parent signature. 1939. No, when I got up 3 months of boot camp in San Diego, we were 4 or 5 of us from that division was sent to Long Beach. All of the ships were anchored in Long Beach then, and Navy in San Diego and Seattle and San Francisco. And we went aboard the Arizona 1st of January of 1940. And April 1st, the whole fleet went for the maneuvers outside of south of Honolulu, south of the Hawaiian Islands. Then that was April 1st of 40. The first hit Oahu and Maui. We finished the maneuvers, and Morrissey decided to keep the fleet in Pearl. So that's where we went into Pearl Harbor and stayed, and moved out of Seattle and San Francisco, Long Beach to San Diego. And so the whole fleet was there. So then after that, we operated half the fleet out, half the battleships. At that time we had battleships, 4 carriers. We had 8 battleships out there. We had whole division, 3 battleships, like our division, battleship division number 1. We had the Oklahoma, Nevada, and Arizona. And those had the West Virginia, California, and Maryland. And in them. And each one had a rear admiral as commander of battleship division. And when I first went aboard the Arizona, Captain, as you can see, Kidd was our skipper. And when he left, Captain Crane came aboard. And then he left, and Captain Van Bockenberg came aboard, and then Admiral Kidd came back as a rear admiral, commander of battleship division number 1. He's still on the ship. He was buried, and he was killed December 7th, along with Captain Van Bockenberg. So we stayed out. We never came back. Well, we came back then, and we crossed the equator in July of 40. Then we went back to Pearl, and then in September we came back to Vernon, Washington for 3 months overall. I went home in November of 40 for my young sister's wedding, November 30, and then we got out of Bremen and went back to Pearl Harbor, and we never came back. When I first went aboard, Chief picked us up at the quarterdeck, and we came in and saluted and reported for duty with our sea bag. a hammock. At that time, we had hammocks. We slept with hammocks in boot camp and on the Arizona, we had hooks. We put the hammock down every day in the hammock then. And, we walked up to Division Two and he says, there's your hooks, there's your, baggage for hammock, bag, and, so I'll see you on deck in 15 minutes. So well, I was in second division. And my battle station was lower handling room and turret number 2. Because at that time, the 3 14-inch guns that had round bags, 105 pounds apiece, and it put 4 of them in each barrel to shoot a shell off. They put the shell in first, 1,600 pounds, and they shoved 4 bags in and closed the hatch, you know. And so we had over 1 million pounds of powder in the forward floor handling. So I was, you know, we were getting $21 a month, so not too much money. So I was laying up on the hammock and studying most of the time for seaman first class. We took an exam for seaman first. I became seaman second in about 4 months. I got $36 a month. So I was seaman second class then on the hammock. So after a while, Bob Sink, who was the chief quartermaster, came down there and said, "Lou, I see you're up there studying, you're not going ashore much, don't have that much money to go ashore. And how would you like to be a quartermaster instructor?" And I said, "I'd love to be," because we all knew that quartermasters were with the officers deck and captain all the time, and they kept the logs. They were on the bridge, they were on the Corvette, they didn't have to scrub decks. And so it's like an advancement. And so it wasn't a week later that I was transferred from second division in the N division, which is navigation division. And I had to learn charts and grids, you know, and maps and charts and grids, and latitude, longitudes, and everything else to navigate star sites. And that's what I did. And and I passed my first exam, third class quartermaster, and 4 months before the Pearl Harbor hit. And at that time, if you got third class before 4 years, you were joining the next 30-month trip to China for AJAC duty. And so I was, oh my God, I thought I'd head up to China. Well, I was on the Arizona football team at B.J. Johnson, Gunners made 3rd Division 5. And in September, half the fleet would go up, and half would come in. 4 battleships go up, 4 would stay in there. 3 go out with the cruisers, destroyers, 1 carrier, and the rest of us stay in. Then on a Monday, when we come back, we'd stay out. The other half went to sea, and then we'd come in because we knew we were preparing for war. And so there was never over half the ships in port. And so in September, when Johnny said, "Let's go to flight school," and I said, "We can't, Johnny. We're right arm race, the gunners race, and the quartermaster right arm, aviation machinist, aviation radioman, and mech were left arm race." And they were with the planes. At that time, from 1934 to 44, the Navy took 30 enlisted men out of the fleet. That's out of the whole fleet, Atlantic and Pacific Fleet, to go to Pensacola and get your wings. And if you pass it, flight school, got your wings, you went into a flying status, and whatever you had to learn all the carriers and everything, and those catapults. So anyway, I met a girl over in Honolulu, Ellen, Lester, to the senior Punahou High School. But I think I was only 20 and 17, so she took me. I met her mother and dad, and finally, after a couple of 3 months, they just gave me one of the bedrooms, and I took my sailor uniform on and put a pair of Hawaiian shirt and Hawaiian shorts on, and we'd go to the movie or something. But I have to say that they kept me in good. I didn't run around all the sailors down the whorehouses and everything. And I was with Hester, and they fed me and I came back to base and really good. So, anyway, I was over at their house the 1st of September, went in, had for dinner. Admiral Calhoun came in, who was commander of base force. And he's the one who wrote the orders for Pensacola. And so we were sitting there and he said, well, Lou, what do you do? And I was probably there. I said, no, Admiral, I got to tell you, I'm third-class quartermaster on USS Arizona. He said, well, that's fine. So I told him about Johnny saying, let's go to Flagstone. He said, well, there's nothing law against it. He said, it's just that most of them are with the planes all the time and nobody else puts in for it. So when you go back to Arizona, take your exam and have your request signed by your executive officer, captain, send it over to me and I'll see if it passes on. So I went back to the ship and I said, Johnny, gee, let's take the test. So we got all of Lieutenant Ragsdale, our pilot aboard the Arizona, one of our pilots, the senior pilot. And the next time we went to sea, he gave Johnny a ride off Cover 3 catapult. We were at sea and doing 15, 18 knots into the wind and shot out the first time I've ever been in an airplane in my life. And so we shot out, went 5,000 feet, and they spun around and came back. At that time, the ship made a hard port turn and it made a big slick there, and they throw out a boom and the plane come in and land on that slick, and we were in the open sea. We taxied up on a rope mat, and the pilot reached over and hold our belt while we stood up, we grabbed the hook and hooked it into the plane and set us back on the catapult. And so we passed that and we sent the request over to Admiral Calhoun in November, first week of November. We got orders to Pensacola, China. And I know it was all because of knowing Harvey. Hester's father, Harvey Hitchcock, was a graduate engineer at Colgate. And he was vice president of Honolulu Dredging and Wine Construction Company. And he worked for the Navy Department under Admiral Calhoun in Pearl Harbor. And so and it was like, anyway, we made our reservations to go back 20th of November on the Missouri, going back to Pensacola. Well, Captain Bockenberg called us down. He called and said, Johnston, you and Connor are not going back to Malloy. So I'm not going to waste $5,000 in Navy money. He said, we're going back December the 19th to Long Beach to pick up our 1.1 guns. So you go back with us and go from there. And those days he said, yes, sir, Captain. And that was it. So we went to sea the last week of November and came back the 5th of December. And on the way in, we were coming into port on a Friday. We were already in on Friday. And Admiral Kidd said to Captain Bachman, we should not be going back into Port Perry. And but we had to go in. So of course the 7th, the Japanese hit 5 minutes in the morning. And 9 minutes after, 8 or 9 minutes after, I was speaking the log for all Kurt Haynes, one of the quartermasters, went to the bridge with Captain Bockenberg and took the logbook with him and everything. And Captain and Admiral Kidd came through right where they were heading to the bridge. And Captain Bockenberg said, Connor, secure the quarterdeck and come to the bridge. Secure the lines because the vessel was outboard of us. So the quartermaster went forward, cut the lines forward on the port side. And I pulled the bank back then and 8 minutes after 8 or something, 9 minutes after it started, a plane came across to probably 10, 12,000 people, 16, 1,700 pound bomb on it, dropped and got a lucky hit. The bomb hit on the starboard side forward by number 2 turret, on the starboard side of the number 2 turret. Went through 5 decks into the lower handling room. And when it went in the lower handling room, there went 1 million pounds of powder and blew up. And that's in the pictures you all see of it. The bow came about 30, 40 feet out of the water and fell straight back down. And bottom came out of the from the bow from the fire after throwing the lines off from the vessel and cut the line. And Commander Fuqua, who was our senior officer aboard, then our first lieutenant came up on the quarterdeck, and he was over by number 4. We got a bomb over there. He got knocked out for a while. And we were over between number 3 turret and the bulkhead, and it didn't hit us, about 4 of us over there. And so he came to and took charge of the whole ship. And the orders, the guys were running out of the fire, and it was pretty bad. And they knock them unconscious if they have to, because they jump over the side there to burn to death in the fire. So we laid 15 or 16 on down on the deck there. They were coming out burning. And then about 40 minutes, about 9:30, 8:30 or 9:40, I don't know exactly what time. Around that time, trying to focus us a vantage ship because we just couldn't burn it so bad forward when the boats were tied up by the dock. We were tied up by the Fox 8T, and the Liberty boats were tied up to the 50-foot motor launches by the T's. So we go to the guys in the launches and stay over the hospital ship and the vantage ship. And for the next 2 days, we fought the fire with the ships, with the boats, all the hoses there. And on Tuesday, the fire came down a little bit, so we got all the base force and slept for one night. And then we went back, and when the ship cooled down, Keith Uzar was our chief water center, and he was our chief diver. And about 12, 13 of us went aboard the ship and dove shallow water helmets. And he dove with a helmet. He stayed out 3 or 4 hours, but stayed out 30, 45 minutes in shallow water. Guys pumping air to us on the deck. And after 4 or 5 days of that, why he told our crew that it was just too dangerous to get our air hoses got on the jagged edges and the patches of it. So they called it off. And I went to base force, and Johnny was captured out to destroyer, and the third class gunner's mate, and destroyer and gunner's mate went out to sea because they stopped the Japanese in the land, and the ships were available. There was only 2 of them, and they were out to sea watching the coast. And so that must have been on the 15th, 18th, and 17th, 20th of December. I got a call into Harvey that I was okay. And he got a call to my mother just before Christmas of 41. But she got to tell her I was missing an accident, that I was okay. But I couldn't call him, but he called. And so they called us. So anyway, December the 23rd, I remember going to the hospital and saw a light foot, and he was in pretty bad shape. He was one of our boys. And he died 2 weeks later. And then Pete and I were transferred up to Honolulu because Captain Geisman was our executive officer on the ship. He was a full commander, but he made him captain immediately. And they made him full West Marshal. And he wanted us up there because we were experienced in 45s and experienced in short patrol and everything else. And we put out the order that nobody was to be on the streets after sunset or before sunrise or shot. And they knew we met. And nobody that upset that or tried to upset it or demonstrate or anything else, we just lived with it. So May of 1945 was full. So we were in Camp Geisman up there, and then so after our first delivery was about the first week or something, January 42. And Coach Nassar, I went over to Essex to see her and her mother and father. They did that night. First delivery was 30 or 40 days. And in walked Admiral Calhoun. I thought I'd signed your orders for Pensacola. I told him what happened. We lost him on the 7th in Arizona, and Johnny was opposite of the store. And it wasn't 3 days. He had Johnny ordered back into port to meet off. And we were on a reservation for the next literally back to San Francisco. And on our way back, we got down children from the military going back to the United States. Remember, that's the territory of Hawaii, yeah, it was not a state. And the military wives and children were out there and they wanted to get them out of that war zone, so they were bringing back to the States. So we, 5 days had duty on the lure, taking care of watching and taking care of those. We at San Francisco, he got a train, we didn't have planes in those days, just trains. He took a train through Texas to go to Pensacola. I took one through Denver to go to Pensacola. And we got stopped one day in our hometown, so family. Went on to Pensacola, and we started the third week or fourth week in January, and had a list of class. And we went 7 days a week, 7 nights a week, studied. I helped with all the navigation for the pilot. They, other aviation ratings were listed. We were 30 men in one class. Helped us with the trust and the drag on the ships and what was caused the flight and everything else, and stalls and engines and radios and everything else. But we all knew Morse code backwards, you know, quartermaster. I could stand on a bridge at that time and read signals and light signals from another ship over here, and I'd give them the tap for the signal who brought them up here. But it's just like that. We did that here. So anyway, we got our wing. Bill, Johnny and I all got our wings November 15th, 1942, from January 1st to February until November, and 9 months. 350 hours flight time, night time, instrument time, and everything all the time. Well, Johnny went to a utility squadron, and Bill and I were sent from Pensacola to San Diego. We got to San Diego, and we were assigned to BP-11, which is PBY. And they'd been trying to avoid at Pearl Harbor, and then they came back, got new planes, went to Guadalcanal and up. Then they'd come back to the States to get new planes and reorganize. And so we got sent to BP-11, and Commander Campbell was our skipper. And so I went into Gordon Kennington's crew, and he went into another crew. And of course, at that time, find a ship there in San Diego, and they said, well, we're going to hold you up a month, and we were supposed to fly to Kaneohe. And they painted the PBYs all black. So we're the first black batch squad. We filled up fall 23. Painted us all black, so we could fly all night long, so they could see sign it. And we left San Diego then, 12 of us, Cliff Campbell. And Cliff Campbell called me out of Gordon Kennington's crew to be his co-pilot, because the co-pilots were the navigators at the time, and I'd been quartermaster. And we had 12 planes going out, so I went to his crew for the flight to Kaneohe. We took off 5:30 at night, landed at 12:30. That's at 19.7 hours, 19 and a half hours. So San Diego to Kaneohe at 8,000 feet. And all the planes made it to Kaneohe except 3 of them got looked, they were behind, so they looked down, they saw Honolulu Mauna Kea in Hawaii, and they thought it was a Diamond Head, and they turned left and went on down to Hawaiian land. They ran out of gas. We went on to Kaneohe, they had to gas up and fly back to Kaneohe. And we were there at Kaneohe for 2 months. We flew out to Midway and helped the Air Force navigate on their, it was Army Airport at that time. Because they fly to Midway, go out, take a 100-mile crossing, come back in and miss the island. So we didn't have the navigation, ocean navigation. So we went over there and we flew with them, and I flew with them and navigated, showed them how to navigate, look at the water and say it was 12 or 15 knots and to have 4 degrees drift or 5 degrees drift or whatever it was. And so they appreciate it. We were out there about 10 days, you know, and did about 10 flights, 12, 14-hour flights. Came back to Honolulu, and we all took off to 311 for Perth, Australia. everybody who was coming just didn't know when. Even when I went home, in November 1940, the year before, my young sister's wedding, my older sister was going to Red College. She's 3 years older than I am. And I was there for a couple of 3 days and for her wedding and everything. And my older sister said, Lois, I'm going to the convent. I'm going to be a nun. I said, oh, you are? She said, yes. Says you're in the Navy and you're going to go to war and somebody has to pay for it. And that was in November of 1940. So everybody in the States knew that we were heading. Remember the Japanese, that war didn't start there in Pearl Harbor. It started in 1932. The Japanese went through Korea. Korea at that time was one country. They went through Korea, Manchuria, and eastern China, all the way down the East China coast from 1932 to 1941. And they must have killed 5 to 7 million Chinese on the way down. And we knew that someday it was going to come. We had our fleet, Asiatic fleet, based in the Philippines today, Manila, Pacific Bay. And we've been out there for years, since 1905. When the 45 came into the Navy, the reason that came in was because the guerrillas in the 38s wouldn't get knocked down with one bullet. And they designed that in 1905 so they had 4,500 pounds of pressure there. And that's where we got the 45. So that 45, it was 1940, 41, we had practice at Bishop Point all the time. I was on the 40 on the pistol. And we knew one shot would knock it down. 4,500 pounds of pressure, one shot. And we had 7 shots in the clip. So we didn't need you like today. They shoot 10, 15, 20 rounds just at somebody to shoot at. They don't need one. These policemen and everything, what they need is more training with that gun so they just boom one shot. And that's it. And they saved it. We were taught to save the rest of the ammunition because we might be behind the line somewhere. We might need to keep it for months. So that's fine. Anyway. When the first planes came across, first one hit 9 yards, they came across the hill. When they came across the hill, it was immediately that we sounded general quarters. Everybody saw the Reds, and they knew immediately what it was. And their guns were firing within 30 seconds on the ships and on the beach. And well, we had 2 waves. The first wave did most of the damage, and we had 8 battleships there, and they sunk those. That was the main part of the fleet. When the Nevada pulled out to head up the channel, all the planes on the hills headed for her because they wanted to sink her in the channel. And they closed the fleet off for 6, 8 months. So they got her out of it. That's when Chief Quartermaster beached her up there at Barbary Point. And then they were in a court martial because Captain hadn't told it to, but then they decided to give him the Distinguished Service Cross because it was the best thing in the world. They knew exactly what they were doing. And so it happened. We came in and we should have been there. 8 battleships were in port. And the Utah was over there and they reported they sunk a carrier. Well, the Utah in the 1930s, early 30s, had been taken up as a battleship. And it was made, taken off the decks and put a platform there for landing. And there was a target ship after that for the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years before Pearl Harbor. And it was moored over there, still there today that they sunk it. But the Japanese reported they sunk the carrier that was parked there, and it wasn't, it was Utah. And but we had 8 battleships in there, every one of them was sunk. So if we'd have been to sea, a couple of us might have got sunk at sea, but the Japanese fleet that brought 3 carriers in there, and battleships and cruisers and everything else in the north. So they trained at the north end of Japan. They came across the north south of Alaska and returned. December the 4th is when they sent their message that east wind rain that they were going to attack Pearl Harbor in 42 hours. Colonel Thorpe out of Indonesia got it, sent it to Roosevelt. Roosevelt held it, and Kimberly Short didn't get the telegram or the notice of it until 2 o'clock Sunday afternoon after the raid was over. So it was, we all knew it. The minute the first plane came across, General Pointers were shot, the first guns were bumped, and the first wave was in and out in 15 minutes. You know, they don't have to spend too much time if everything happens. And then the second wave came in at 8:30. That's when most of the Japanese got shot down in the second wave. And the ones that were shot down were it. I think 365 planes come in there. They lost 160. Then they took off, got back to their carrier, and went over past Midway, and then up into Japan, and they got back to Japan.
Want to add a couple things to what Mr. Connor was talking about there. We had a Pearl Harbor veteran in South Beloit. He passed away last year. His name was Jim Hansen Sr. And he was on a fireboat off the Oklahoma. And he would tell these horrid stories as the sailors from the Oklahoma, they were forced, you know, because they had to abandon ship, they were forced into this burning oil on the surface there. So they would stay underwater as long as they could, and they would shoot up out of the oil right through the flames. And the guys on the boats would try and grab them like that. They were so soaked in oil, they would slide back or their skin would peel off because they were all burned. They'd slide back down, they'd never see them again. So it was something he never forgot. Jim just passed away a year ago, almost exactly a year ago. And, you know, it's just some incredible stories. Had another gentleman over in Kenosha who's passed on now. His name was Leo Stewart. He was stationed in Wheeler Field, which was the Army Air Base on Pearl Harbor. And the Japanese came in and bombed Wheeler Field, as Lou was pointing out there. And they took out the airplanes because the US just had them lined up like sitting ducks out there. And they took them out, went back out and hit the ships. And while they're in between the two raids, Leo said that they were actually able to scramble, get parts together, and they got 12 planes up airborne. And when the Japanese came back in a couple hours later to attack, they actually had 12 planes that went up and engaged them and had the first dogfight of World War II for the US that day, and you never hear about that. We had another veteran, Marlboro Zlansky from Racine, who was on Guam on December 7th, 1941. It's another thing you don't hear much about, but as the Japanese hit Pearl Harbor, they swept down through the Philippines and took control of the South Pacific. And Marv was on Guam, and he and about 160 some Marines were taken captive, and they served the duration of World War II in a hard labor camp in Japan. And they were actually still in prison a month after the war before they were finally liberated. And he only weighed 80 pounds when they saved him there. And it's just incredible stuff. We had Dr. Alan Pang from Rockford, was a Pearl Harbor veteran, and he was in the ROTC on Pearl Harbor when the Japanese attacked, and went down that day and signed up for the Air Force, Air Corps, and he went on to become a major in the Air Corps and flew 35 missions over Europe later in the war. It's just, and you think, as he's alluding to there, most of these veterans were only 20, 21, crew chiefs were 22, 23 years old, just so mature. We're so lucky that they were there when they were there. So do we want to try and reach?
Yeah.
Mr. Gunter?
Yeah, call him. Okay. So do you want to call him on your phone?
Yeah, let's try
John
that.
gave me the phone number here. Do you have that?
I know it's a 505, right? Or
503.
3. Well, see, I probably would have called his neighbor.
All right, and the microphone. You got that there? Okay.
Do I have any power?
Your name is known for English, press 2. Following English,
I hit 1. See, I'm a guy. That's how we follow directions.
Para español, presione 1. For English, press 2. Please enter your PIN number or press *0 to be connected to customer service.
That doesn't sound encouraging.
Please enter
Oh.
your PIN number.
There's a second number here. Well, let's lose phone number. Am I supposed to call the second number? Do you know that?
Oh, the second number, that's his daughter's number. That's 916.
Yeah.
The 530 is,
Oh, it's a 530 because it says 503.
You want to take a look at it, Don, and see?
Probably just did a telemarketer called in Nigeria or something. Oh, it says 503 on here. Let's try that.
530, 205.
9550.
Yes.
The son's name.
Who's going to answer the phone, Don?
Who should actually?
Hi, Lou. This is Mark Finnegan from Vets Roll out here in Beloit, Wisconsin, Fort Atkinson. Just calling in. We were going to connect for a couple of minutes to thank you for your service tonight. You had talked to Don Millar previously. If you get the message in time, it's 5:05 your time, 7:05 Central. My number is 608-207-8319.
I'm going to leave him the message.
608-207-8319, Mark Finnegan. And shall we just wish him? Thank you?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, the group we have here today, oops, guess we should do it here. The group we have here today, small gathering, but in honor of you and your incredible legacy, we want to give you a hand here and thank you for your service to our nation. We'll be here for a little bit yet. If you get the message, feel free to give me a call. Thank you. Bye. I would imagine, like I was saying on the way up, he's probably a man in demand on a day like
Yeah.
this. It's quite an incredible story, though, to think what they went through. Do you have questions for me? We'll give it a few minutes and see if he happens to get that message. Do you have questions for myself or for Don? I mean, how about thanking this man for his service in Korea?
I do want to mention too that Lou Conter was born in Chillicothe, Wisconsin.
Mhm.
He's a Wisconsin boy, so we're very proud to have him as our guest.
Yeah.
On this program.
Oh, that'd be great if he calls. It really would. There was a picture, you want to look at that guy. There was a picture up there earlier. I had the extreme honor of meeting him at Oshkosh back in 2016 when they had the 75th anniversary salute to the Pearl Harbor vets. They had 18 Pearl Harbor vets there that day. Actually, we had 3 of them that we took up there from Beloit, Stan Manus, Jim Hansen, and Leo Stewart, or Marvel's Lansing. But you just get goosebumps when you meet somebody like that. That's what they've been through. I don't think he alluded to it in his interview there, but he also was, after Pearl Harbor, was in his plane and was in 2 battles where his planes were shot down. And one of them, Howie was just reading about on the way up here. They were shot down. I don't know, it was like 7 miles off. I forget which island it was now. But anyway, shot down at night in pitch black. They were going to be attacked by sharks. And he instructed the crewmen that were out there floating in the ocean. He instructed them, if a shark comes up to you, swim softly. If it comes up to you, you punch it in the nose. And he said that's what they did. And the sharks would swim away, and he saved his whole crew. You don't believe me, do you? That's the truth. You have a little brother?
That's what they recommend.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say, if your little brother's brother, no. It's just-
Practice on them.
Yeah. But now, we just, we pray, you know. I'll ask this question here. How many people, let me rephrase, would you care to guess how old the youngest World War II vets are now? The youngest ones, the youngest.
Mid-90s.
If a veteran was 17 years old the day the Japanese surrendered, August 15th, 1945, they're now 93. That is the youngest World War II vets, except for a handful of them that snuck in at 15, 16 years of age. There was a few of those. But here's another trivia question. Pardon?
Our uncle,
Really?
Breen, he was 60, I think,
Really? Isn't that amazing?
but we're not sure if it was one of us, a few years later, but he got in World War II. and he was only 15, 16, which means he was too young legally, but.
Yeah.
He lied, he looked big enough, and they got him.
We had a guy in South Beloit, Don Mazzoni. He got into the Navy when he was 15 years of age. Would you care to guess the youngest verified veterans of World War II? There's a book called Underage Vets of World War II. How old the youngest veteran was in World War II
14.
in America? There's 2 of them that were 12 years of age. Honest goodness, honest goodness. And one of them fell on a ship and broke his back, and that's when they discovered how old he was. They court-martialed him, and later on, when he was 18, he went back in the service, I think in the Army or something like that, and had dishonorable discharge. And some senator in his home state took it up in Congress in the 90s, I believe it was, and they were able to reverse his dishonorable discharge and whatnot. 12 years old, 2
Well,
of
if he
them.
was 12, shouldn't he have been tried as a minor?
It's just,
Right?
it's just, I can only imagine, it must have been some big husky farm kids or something, you know, but it's just amazing. Now, you heard me mention Rosita Riveter, this young lady, and you heard me mention Rosita Riveter. Do you know what Rosita Riveter is or what? No? Do you? You ever seen that? We don't have the poster here. You ever seen that picture of a lady from World War II where she's posing like this? Right? You seen that one? That's Rosita Riveter. And the reason that's important, it's hard to believe in this day and age, but back in the 1940s,
Yeah. Her name was Rosie.
it was actually Naomi was her real name, but I think it was
Your
Naomi.
phone might be ringing. Your phone might be ringing.
No, that's a weather notice. Snowing in Fort Atkins. But Rosita Riveter is a name that was given to the ladies that back in those days, women generally, they stayed at home. They took care of the house and the family. Men went out and worked. It's hard to believe nowadays because the women and the men all have to work. And so in order to win World War II, we had to keep our factories running and we had to allow more soldiers to go fight around the world. And so the women moved into the factories. And my mother is still living today, and she was a Rosita Riveter in World War II. And we wouldn't have won the war if it had not been for the women that moved into the factories and took over those man jobs. And they proved that the women could do it as good or better than the men were doing it. And so they
And
were
what-
called Rosie the Riveters, and
And what happened to all the Rosies when the men came home?
yeah, they were told to go back into the.
That's right.
Back into the house, yeah.
Done with you,
Yeah.
which
There was-
led to
It
the
changed the
feminist
face of the
revolution of the
workforce forever.
1960s.
Yeah,
There was one job that they only a woman could do. There were, you know what that,
the wing,
the wing,
yeah,
the planes, the wiring was done in the wings, after the wings, skins were put on, and the bombers, one of the, they had to get some of the smaller women.
Yep.
They had to crawl inside the wing in order to finish the wiring inside the wing
that's right.
for the bombers.
See,
So they've
that's-
been hard pressed to find a man.
My mother had
Fit
two
there.
jobs in World War II. One of them, she was a cabler for the aircraft, where they put the cable systems together to run their rudders and whatnot. And then the other thing she did is she worked at what's, then they call it the War Department, now it's the Pentagon. The Pentagon was built after the war. And she worked on decoding messages from the Germans, and the Italians. And she got a neat little certificate for that and stuff, you know, but, you know, when we found that out, growing up, I'm 61, almost 62 years old, growing up, everybody in my world was a World War II vet. I guess we just took it for granted. And never sat down and talked to my dad, and never thanked him for his service, same with my mom. And it wasn't until probably 10 years ago, we were going through some things in my mom's, and we found this water stain certificate from the War Department with some general had signed it, you know, thank you for what you did, you know. And my wife actually found it, and she asked my mom about it. And as humble as that generation is, my mom goes, yeah, I remember that. You know, it's like, wow, you know, to us, you're a hero. And to them, it's just, they just did what they had to do. I just, gosh, Holly, the stories we've heard over the years, you know, and sadly, they're going to the grave so fast now. And now our Korean War vets have hit their 90s. I don't think you were there for a while yet, but our Korean War vets are in their 90s, and our Vietnam vets are in well into their 70s now. You know, time doesn't wait for us. And so one of the things
Even our first Gulf War vets are getting old.
yeah, you bet there. You bet there.
That's-
One of the things I do is if I go
That's
talk
30
to
that's 30
schools
years
and
ago.
whatnot, what's this thing? Cell phone?
Okay.
It's also a computer. And what you can do is you can talk over Christmas. If you get together with grandma and grandpa, great grandma and grandpa, if you have a cell phone or borrow mom's, there you go. You can sit there, and this is the honest goodness truth. And I know you hear me say this all the time ad nauseum, but you can sit down because you have the power of this computer in your hand. You can sit down and say, Grandpa, Grandma, can you tell me about what you did during the war or whatever, you know, if they weren't veterans? Because this is digital entertainment and you can keep this forever. Just like his interview is going to be available 100 years from now to share to your great grandkids. And you can do that because when we were growing up, we learned history from a black and white history book, a textbook. And they were drawings and whatnot from back in the Civil War and things like that. And it's people telling stories about what they remember about what they did during the Civil War, World War I or whatever. And how many of you can actually remember what you did last Saturday? You probably can't. You know, so how true is that history we read in those history books? You know, it could have a political slant to it, you know, somebody was biased against a race or something like that. And so we have the ability with those simple little cell phones to record history, living history. You can sit down with Don over here and you can record not just his story, but you can record him, the color of his face, what makes him laugh, what makes him cry, the sound of his voice. And 100 years from now, you can say, hey, this was your great grandpa, and you pull that out and you can show it. I mean, that's so true.
They recorded and put it on YouTube.
Yeah,
I mean,
or whatever the
that's
mode would be at that point.
No, I mean, as soon as they done recording it.
Yeah,
Millions of
you
people
post it
record
immediately,
things
you
for
bet.
whatever, so
You
rather
bet.
than just.
There are a
keeping
variety
recording.
of projects around the country.
you
The
bet.
Library of Congress collects
Oh, yeah.
oral histories through
So does
something
the EAA.
called StoryCorps. And we're going to be doing a StoryCorps project here at the library, a bunch of
Excellent.
libraries in this area.
Audio
The
and
first
video.
guy, the first guy to be interviewed is going to be.
All right. That's point, guys. That's wonderful, but it's so true. I mean, don't take it to the grave with you, Don. I really mean that. I tell people all the time. My mother is an example, you know, what she did in her life growing up and whatnot, and she went on to raise 8 kids and things like that. But now she has dementia so bad, she doesn't even talk anymore. She just sits there, she just mumbles and talks, or doesn't talk. And luckily, we partner with Vets Roll with a group out of Harlem High School down in Proctor. And they have a video history project that they've been doing for about 10 years now. And they'll sit down and they interview these veterans just like this, and like hopefully the library is gonna do here. And that's what they're doing, and they share it to the National Archives, and we just have to do it. You know, at the Wisconsin Veterans Museum, they're doing an audio file, they're not doing the video portion of it, which I'm a little surprised at, because to me, seeing the storyteller is just as much as hearing the story being told, you know? So,
EAA has been doing the same thing for years.
yes, yeah, EAA does it, that's
For
true.
years, because they know the big benefit each year.
So if Roosevelt knew that these planes were coming in and he didn't do anything, did he ever have to answer why he?
You I guess that's a debate that'll go down in history, because there's people that say that's not true, but there's people say that he knew it was coming, but he figured it was the only safe way to draw the US into the war, you know, so. I'm not gonna tread on that one because it would just be my opinion, you know, I just, I just don't know. I'm sure Luke will tell you.
Prior to Pearl Harbor, the country was split. Half the country wants to spend money on our own defense, and half the country wants to spend money to give to our allies in their defense of the war in the 30s against Germany. As soon as it was Pearl Harbor, everyone was on one side.
Yeah, immediately.
And my grandparents, my grandfather was in World War I, my grandparents were split on either side on which was which. But as soon as it was Pearl Harbor, everyone switched the side of
That's right.
not only, well, us going into the war, but also sending money to Europe to help all of our allies. So we
Yeah.
were- at that point, we were, you know, the Japanese knew we were split down the middle and thought if they attacked, we would go, well, okay, we don't want to get involved, not realizing it'd have the opposite effect.
Right.
You know, they say, what they
Good
say,
point.
oak sleeping lion. Is that
Yeah,
the phrase?
you poked the sleeping lion.
Yeah, oak sleeping lion.
Um,
I didn't think thought we gotta, like shark, we got punched in the nose, we back off.
yeah,
Can't realize, you know, you punch us in the nose and we're gonna punch you in the gut.
that's what they
But
do.
how do you get a veteran, let's say from World War II, to talk? Because my father-in-law was in World War II. And there was only about 2 things that my husband at least could remember that his father told him. He found out he's allergic to coral because he was in a helicopter that came down on a coral island.
Wow,
As soon as he got on the ground, he started having breathing issues, started turning red. We got to evacuate this guy. Got him back on the helicopter, went back up, got to a certain height, and all of a sudden, it was fine.
wow.
And the only other thing he said was, well, I have this card. And my husband remembered seeing it. And the card said, they were handed out to all the guys in his group by the commanding officer for permission to kill yellow-bellied jacks.
Yellow lily jabs.
That's exactly what's on the card.
That was the propaganda of the war.
Yeah, it wasn't a real political world back then. compared to what it is
You
now.
should see all the poses, all the propaganda.
Yeah,
pretty
yeah, oh, yeah,
Pretty nasty.
yeah.
But he wouldn't talk about the war.
You know, I guess,
And I
Holly,
can
you
understand that.
you defer that to Holly, because on the buses, when we go down the road, that's one of the things we do. We have the vets get up.
But they're talking to each other.
Well, they
Who
are,
have
and they're not.
experienced it.
They are and they're not, because that's their comfort zone where they're talking amongst themselves, but with the rest of us there as an audience. You know, go ahead, Holly, you want to come up here? Please?
Well, I think the question's a little bit different in the vets role world than it is with the general public. In our world, the vets come knowing that there's gonna be an environment for that.
That's true.
And we foster that environment, and our team is very well trained to let the veterans get there in their own time. And usually, like on my bus, we don't have them get up and start talking until either late the first day or even into the second day to give them time to acclimate and get accustomed to being where they are and who they're with. And then by the time we offer them the opportunity, it's not required, it's all voluntary. And what I find oftentimes on the buses is there's usually one or two that are ready to get up and chat, and that kind of breaks the ice for everybody else. And invariably, they find they have common ground, and somebody might say something in their discussion that causes somebody else to suddenly free
Yeah.
themselves up to be like, hey, I had that same experience, let me come up. And then they're up there sharing, and it's remarkable how often that happens, and it's just very, very amazing. But
It's
to
not
the-
all bad. I mean. there's
We
a lot
just
of
couldn't
fun.
get him to talk.
Right, and that's very common in,
He
in our, on the
wasn't-
Vets Roll experience,
Yeah.
we have a little bit different environment, but you're absolutely right. I mean, and all of us have probably experienced that with veterans who are unwilling when directly asked, and sometimes they find themselves willing and sometimes not.
I find sometimes, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna ask if it's different with the Rosies, because the male, the American male doesn't express his feelings, doesn't talk about difficult things, doesn't share that we have ingrained, and particularly that generation. You bucked up and you carried on.
Suck it up, Sam.
There was no reason
Yeah,
for
the
you
roses,
to
the
come back
wings,
and
the
tell
wax,
people
probably.
or try to, I mean, so I'm wondering, is it different with the Rosies? Are they a lot more chatty and able to talk about stuff?
But they were humble.
Well, in my experience on our buses, some of our veterans are very willing to talk, so it's not universal that they won't, but the Rosies probably are more likely to share their stories, but when you think about their stories, a lot of them lived through a lot of very hard times and lost a lot of people that they loved and cared about, but most of them weren't in combat.
Right.
Most of them didn't see the horrors that a lot of the combat veterans did.
Right.
So to share their experience might have been just as emotional. Well, I don't know how to compare, to say it's
Yeah.
just as or not just as, but
But I don't think Civil War veterans came home and told their stories. I don't think, I mean, I
Right.
don't think until maybe the last 15 years, we've actually encouraged
Yeah,
and work with
They finally
veterans when they
acknowledged
come
it,
back
yeah.
to deal with the emotional trauma in healthy ways. But that wasn't the way people were then.
I
and
found-
Carl comes to mind, our
Yeah.
Iwo Jima veteran, like I do a lot of reading on military history. I watch a lot of stuff. I talk to a lot of veterans, but I'm not a veteran. That I'm not. And no matter how much I try, and no matter how much I educate myself, I'm never gonna understand what our veterans live with or deal with in a way that another veteran will, or even another active service person. And I remember we had a couple on my bus one year. One was a Rosie and one was a Iwo Jima veteran. And our Iwo Jima veteran was very hard of hearing, and it was very hard for him to be on the bus. He had a lot going on in his mind all the way out to DC. He was just not very outgoing. He didn't want to go on the trip. His Rosie talked him into it. And he'd been there before and he didn't want to go back, and he was just really struggling with it the whole way. He was very agitated by all the noise on the bus that he couldn't really hear. And he and his Rosie were in their seats the whole time. They didn't really interact with others too much. And I remember when we got to the Iwo Jima Memorial, he was very, very off-put that morning. Didn't want anybody to talk to him. We had media with us. They wanted to interview him. He wanted nothing to do with it. Somebody took a picture of him. He got very angry and demanded we get the camera. Like, he just was having a very, very hard time, even though his Rosie was there with him. And we got him up to the memorial, and he needed some time. So we stayed there with him. And we had a silent drill team.
No, drove it in.
Was all set to perform, and they were across this field, and everybody else went and got set up, and he just wasn't ready to go. So we stayed with him, and we eventually got him over there, and he was sitting there watching the silent drill team. And some of the performers learned that there was an Iwo Jima vet with us, and I remember you calling me and asking me if I'd ask him if he would talk to these young Marines who were out there performing for him. And he thought about it for a minute, and he was sitting in a wheelchair, which he didn't really like either, but he needed to sit down. And he thought about it for a minute, and he decided that, yeah, he wanted to meet these young men. And they came over and talked to him. And Carl, before I knew it, he was standing up just as straight as probably he ever had, I don't know, full of stories, just lit up and engaged with these young Marines, like was so proud to talk to them and have them ask about his life and share with them. And I'm sure they shared with him their fears or their whatever it was. And all the way back to Beloit, he was such a different man, just chattering with all of us, very interactive, very engaged, very, like, for him, it was such a healing thing. Something none of us could give him until those young men somehow got through to him.
You know what, you would ask, how you would ask these questions if they don't want to share them. You don't have to sit down with the purpose of an interview, but just have that phone handy. And as that conversation goes like this and goes like this and start steering, you'll know when the time is right. You say, you know, Grandpa, would you mind if I record this? Because I want to be able to share this with my grandson or my grandchild. And, you know, I would say there's a very high likelihood because now, especially if they're a Korea World War II era, they're 90 and up. Like I said, they can't take it to the grave with them. They say, you know, do you mind if I record this so I can save it for my kids? And I'll bet you they do it. You know, you'll just
The
feel.
only
when
reason
it's-
why I asked, because my father-in-law would not talk, is if there was
So-
anybody else in the room that's having an issue trying
Yeah.
to get through. I was wondering if there was
And
anything you
some
could
of
help them with.
Have
There's
just
really
seen
no
it.
formula for it. Everybody's so individual and each person is only gonna share if they want to and when they want to.
Yeah.
We have counselors that ride on the buses with us to help vets with, you know, that are having PTSD issues. Yeah, Dan?
Right, listening to you talking about this, I think atmosphere has a lot to do with a veteran wanting to tell his or her story. For example, when I lived in Dayton, Ohio, there was a gentleman who lived across the street from me. And he lived in a two-story brick home. And in the summer and the spring, he would sit on his front porch and he would just sit there and he would watch the kids playing in the neighborhood. And that was his entertainment. And after a couple of years of observing his behavior, if you will, he came across the street one day and he said to me, "What is your name?" And I told him, he said, "Oh, Mr. Millar," he said, "is that your daughter that I see playing up down the street here during the day?" I said, "Yes." "Could she come across the street and sit on the front porch with me and have some popcorn and drink a glass of iced tea?" So sure, that's fine with me. So after we introduced to each other, he took Bobby across the street, and there were days, on nice days, he would come out and he would look both ways and he'd come over, take her hand, take her across the street, and they'd sit on his front porch for about an hour. She'd fill up with popcorn and iced tea and come home happy, you see. Well, the second year this happened, his daughter was visiting with him one day and she came across the street with him, introduced herself. And she said, "You know, my dad was a World War I Army Air Corps pilot. He flew in the biplanes, open planes.
Wow.
And he was recognized as the first American pilot to down a German aircraft in an open cockpit by dropping a hand grenade down into the cockpit of a German aircraft." Well, that's the way he did. Open cockpits. So she said there's only one thing for him being recognized as the first pilot to do that. She said the Air Force is running a investigation, if you will, as to whether this other man or my dad was recognized as the first pilot to do that in World War I. Well, about a year later, she came over one day just as happy as can be, showed me the letter. The Air Force has now recognized my dad as the #1 pilot to, down a German aircraft in World War I. Well, after the first time I talked to her, I made a beeline for the Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio. And they had a case there with just his uniform in there. Now, this is before the Air Force, finalized their opinion. And after she told me that, I grabbed my camera and went to the Air Force Museum the next day. Boy, although they had his uniform there, they had all kinds of documents and you name it. Okay, George Miller is his name. So, Mark, I'm looking forward to going on dutchroll.org and stopping at the Air Force Museum. And
that's a great stop, too.
George's section there. But no, again, I think his atmosphere has a lot to do with it. I've talked with veterans who are scared of giving their story. I had one here, one gentleman here in Concord. Up the road for us, not too far, up to kind of B if it is, B. And Joe was, I was taking him up to the hospital one day in Madison. He said, Don, I'm going out here to get new hearing aids. They're gonna charge me $5,000 for these things. I said, whoa. I said, no, you were on Luzon at the end of World War II. He said, yeah. He said, I was there to greet General Wainwright and
No, wrong one. And
he said, I was there to greet General Wainwright and this other British general, and they were released from the prison camp on Luzon. And he said, when I was wounded, he said, I went to a malaria coma. And he said, I was out in a coma for 10 days. And when I awoke, the nurse sitting by my bedside, she gave me her name and said she was from Oconomowoc, Wisconsin. He said, well, my gosh, I've known Tom for many years, Oconomowoc, Wisconsin. But what I'm getting at is, Joe, he told me, he said he's gonna pay $5,000 for the hearing aid. I said, well, what is your percentage of disability? He said, I only get 53%. I said, for all that you have been through in World War II, this is all you have, now you have to pay for your hearing aids. Well, I happen to have a copy of a National Geographic, I think it's a July issue of 2007. And I think Amy conducted it, she was kind enough to put out a copy from it one day. And 8 pages on malaria, the causes, solutions, etc. I told Joe, I said, take this to your doctor and get this thing squared away. He did, and then he was given 100% disability, and they're on school saving for him. But again, a lot of these veterans, I guess they would hold their stars. Why? As you people are saying, I don't know. But the atmosphere, I think atmosphere has a lot to do with it. If you're among fellow veterans and you hear their stories, they may open up. Or who knows what's going to make them open up. Just like this story about George Miller. I don't know if I ever prompted him to come across the street and ask him my daughter go over there with him. But that started something. And then his daughter got involved and she said, oh yeah, my dad was finally recognized another one pilot World War I down in Germany. So I think atmosphere has a lot to do with it. Okay, that's all I got. Thank you.
No, that's fine. We gotta get this wrapped up. I don't think he's gonna call back, unfortunately. Man, you had your hand up several times there, or you both.
I was
Yeah.
just going to add, I don't have much to add, but I was gonna commend this gal's father-in-law. She heard more from him than I heard from my dad, who was a veteran of the Korean War. I finally remembered to call him up on Veterans Day. He's from Michigan, and thank him for his service. He said, shut up. I just want to forget about it.
Oh, well.
I think that's the way my father-in-law was.
Yes.
You know, we went into that.
And I
He
said,
didn't want to talk about, he was in the Battle of the Bulge, and it was like, yeah, I mean,
So then I did ask him, well, why? Wet socks.
Oh,
Oh.
Wet
trench
socks.
foot and stuff.
They dry overnight, and then the moment he's stepping outside the barracks, wet socks.
Yeah.
So that's all I know about it. Because he was a guard for the prisoners of war
Hmm.
there, and which he said was an easy job because they got food. Heart goes out to people.
There's a gentleman in Elkhorn, Grant McMillan, and he was in what's called the Chosin Reservoir in Korea, which is considered to be some of the most cruel battle conditions the US military ever had. And Grant was a Chinese POW for almost 3 years. And while he was in prison, one of his fellow prisoners, prison mates, prisoners, I guess, had developed trench foot and his feet were literally rotting. And Grant commandeered a set of scissors that he found and amputated both of the guy's legs at the ankles and saved his life. And the Army tried to court martial him, similar to what I think it was Lou was telling us. The Army tried to court martial him because that wasn't his MOS, and he had to defend himself against the military at his own expense originally. They finally made it right. Or we had the guy from up by northern Wisconsin by Hayward one year that was also in the Chosin Reservoir, and they were so frozen that when they finally got to, you know, a hospital or whatever it was, he was passing out, and they cut his boots off and whatnot, and his legs were all discolored. And he actually, this is a little gross, he actually had 20 toes because his toes had been frozen for so long, but they were still walking on them, that all 10 of them, the bones had gone outside the skin casing on his toes. And, you know, it's just, and they continue to fight. They, you know, I mean, this guy in this case was only 18 years old. I remember when that happened. But, so on that happy note, I probably. We've gone on, oh, I'm sorry, yeah.
We grew up with a neighbor that was World War II vet and even talked French. But I would stop by once in a while, dropping off tomatoes or something in my garden. I just step in, he goes, downtown. And we just talk about stuff, and once in a while, he's had another little story about World War II. After he passed away, and his son was there for the funeral, I mentioned it, he goes, there's a lot more stories than I got. I just sat, I just sat down because we just, weather or something, and then he'd bring up just, one particular thing that happened, and so you just bring it up, and
Once that
this is what-
conversation starts. it
yeah,
can go.
this was before smartphone, so there was no way of recording. But he was like, I'm just talking to me, let's just stop, let's talk a little bit.
And
So
his-
we talked for 20 minutes, and one little story, another story. He's like, I never heard all those stories, all that, because I just happened by, and he just, well, you know, came out of the living room with the TV and sat down and talked for 20 minutes, and one more story, one more story.
Yeah, sometimes that's the way to do it too.
And his
Bit- bit of a
girlfriend,
thing.
when the war started, he refused, they were gonna get married, and then the war came. And he said, no, I do not want to leave you
Make you a war
and
widow.
make you a war widow, thank you. And so he went off to war, and then was it in 44 or 45?
Yeah, well, the very, very short story was, well, he was in England and he was an MP, delivered mail on Harley, eventually was in Europe. And he was a very mild-mannered kind of guy, but he had a lieutenant that came in, and he just realized, slowly got worse and worse, and finally got to the point where he told off his lieutenant. It's like, well, because this guy, he said, well.
This
he-
guy was not like that.
Yeah, he said, you just, you were, a good person, you started anyhow. So the next day, the lieutenant was in charge of, he was supposed to pick up a number of guys. Some were gonna go to the Pacific and some were gonna go to the Battle of Ouch. He got put on this to go to the Battle of Ouch. Well, the chaplain got wind of the argument, knew what Ted was like. He went in, overrode the orders, switched it to sending him to the Pacific. So he got, well, because apparently Chaplin has the power to override something like that.
Huh.
Overall, change him to being sent to the Pacific. Well, then he got 3 weeks leave, came back home, got married, went to Texas to be redeployed, and the war ended.
Wow, timing is everything.
Timing is everything.
Wow.
Let's see, and go back. Yeah, so been 45.
Well, I guess I want to thank Don and Amy for putting this on. I also wanted to
Thank
thank
Mr.
these two
Millar.
young folks right here. This is just awesome to see you here with us old people and absorbing history. I mean, it's really cool. Do you have any veterans in your family? That guy sitting next to you, maybe? He looks like, no, really, I would have guessed. Your grandpa or uncles, aunts
Her grandpa served in the Marine Corps.
in Vietnam, maybe?
He wasn't active service, but he was in the Merchant Marines. during-
Wow. Very cool,
Yes.
very
And
cool.
then her great grandparents all served in World War II.
Awesome. How about you? You have anybody in the military in your family?
No, but my
Actually,
friend
probably do, you don't know
Macy
it.
Yeah.
has, his grandpa is served in World War I. My dad thinks it's World War II, but
It was a
But-
great grandpa, so. Yeah, none living. An uncle that was a Marine in Vietnam, and my grandpa was World War II Navy.
I was telling you about the mail call, that one of the letters I also remember was, my grandpa served in World War I, World War II, and World War III. I gotta have you and you come over here just a second, if you would, please. One thing that's really important to the veterans, there's an old guy sitting over there by the wall, okay, his name is Don, all right? When we thank the veterans for their service, you shake their hand, right? But you don't look like this, you don't say thank you for your service, you'll look them right in the eyes, thank you for your service, okay? Go practice on that guy right there. What do you do? Thank you for your service, yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks
Have a
for
wonderful day.
coming.
Thanks for having us. Thanks, Sadie.
You're welcome.
I will let you know if I hear from
Hear
you.
from them,
That would be
yeah.
great. Don, I'll let you know if he calls back.
Did you call back?
No,